The compulsion to admire its beauty. Everywhere you look, it's like a painting, but it's natural. It's extremely beautiful, this country, even though it has lost most of its beauty. If you compare the country now with 24 years ago, you can see how much it has declined. You might not realize it, but before the 1990s, Venezuela was among the 20 richest countries in the world.
And you could compare it with rich countries, but today it's considered one of the poor ones. You might find that interesting to know. Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world, and it's oil that is very easy to access, like the oil of the Persian Gulf.
Not like the oil and gas in the US and Canada, which are hard to extract. Venezuela's oil is right at hand. Its location is also valuable, so its oil is more expensive. Because in South America, oil is hard to find, like the oil Brazil buys from Venezuela, they pay more for it than the oil they buy from Saudi Arabia. That's because Saudi oil has to pay millions of dollars in shipping fees to get to South America. So, as it's clear, Venezuela is a wealthy country. But why has it been getting poorer day by day since the 1990s?
Venezuela has one of the highest inflation rates in world history. The country has experienced 130,000% inflation. This inflation has caused more than 85% of Venezuela's population to fall below the poverty line. Even worse, more than 50% of the population has no work at all. There simply aren't any jobs for them. If we look at Venezuela's economy in the 1970s, it's almost unbelievable.
Because at that time, it was the richest country in the world. Its per capita production was higher than any other country, even higher than the US, Switzerland, Singapore, and Monaco. If you look closely, check the history of these countries. We all know that many countries in South America, and even in North America, didn't really exist in the same way back then.
And all these countries formed after Christopher Columbus arrived in the Americas, and the colonizers, Spain, Portugal, the Netherlands, and England, expanded there. Of course, there were also indigenous empires in the region, like the Aztecs and the Incas, which are the most well-known. But the Europeans treated them very badly.
At the time the Spaniards entered this region, they had just expelled the Muslims from Spain, and for that reason they strongly influenced other religions, forcing Christianization.
When they arrived on the American continent, they told everyone that they had to become Christian by force. That's why when you go to countries in North and South America, the main religion in almost all of them is Christianity, and this was done by the Spaniards. Now, what happened to Venezuela? We drifted to other places, but it was necessary to say these things because the first place the Spaniards settled, established communities, and formed a government was right here, Venezuela.
Despite the fact that Venezuela is a forested and mountainous country and developing it is difficult, the Spaniards liked this place very much. Its development and resources mattered to them, but even more important was its strategic location. They believed that if they controlled this place, they could control the entire region. That's why they began construction and development in Venezuela. In short, Venezuela became the center of power of the Spanish Empire across both North and South America. Two paths emerge in this story. Among the other residents of Venezuela, those of Spanish descent, yes, they themselves called it Venezuela.
And just like the Americans who freed themselves from British rule, they also wanted to break free from Spanish domination. The Venezuelans formed a government and declared independence, saying this is the Republic of Venezuela. But just like the British who fought the Americans, the Spaniards also started fighting Venezuela, and they went back and forth with each other for 3 years. They were saying, "We want independence," while the Spaniards were saying, "No, this is the Spanish Empire." But they weren't paying attention to what was happening. Right beside Venezuela, in what is today French Guiana, the French had landed. They were watching the conflict and decided to take advantage of it and seize much of Venezuela's territory. Then they entered this young country, but they soon realized they were facing many difficulties. The country is completely covered with dense forests and mountains. In other words, if you try to fight in the Amazon jungle and the mountains, it becomes extremely difficult. Then the French gave up, and the Spaniards also faced problems. For example, they were fighting the Americans in North America and were involved in conflicts across Europe. Eventually, they abandoned Venezuela, and the country finally became independent. This independence made no real difference in the lives of the people here, because a monarchy was established, a court was formed, and the country became extremely class-based. The majority were peasants, while a small minority lived in complete comfort. This situation continued for a century until 1925, the year the Dutch discovered oil in Venezuela. This master and peasant country suddenly transformed because before oil, its main economy was coffee, and most of the population were peasants who planted and harvested it. But oil took over the economy, coming under centralized control, and in a way, it shut down coffee farming and much of agriculture.
During this period of oil exploitation, which was very intense, especially given Venezuela's location, there was a major buyer, the US and Canada, who became the #1 purchasers of Venezuelan oil. South America also bought some, but their consumption was much smaller. The second biggest customers were the Europeans. Venezuelan oil was shipped to Europe by the boatload. This situation continued for 50 years, and Venezuela became the richest country in Latin America. Rich but dependent, mostly dependent on oil exports and on importing food. Oil caused them to completely abandon agriculture, to the point that everything was imported, and all the money that came in was invested in the oil industry. The disaster was that the entire oil industry was controlled by Americans and the British, and the Venezuelans had no role in it at all. The major American and European companies controlled Venezuela's oil: Royal Dutch Shell, Gulf Oil from the US, and Standard Oil, the Rockefeller family. They effectively controlled all of Venezuela's oil. And Venezuela was happy because money was coming in and generating income. Exactly at the time of World War II, oil became even more valuable, and Venezuela grew rapidly again. While Europe was running out of money, Venezuela's coffers were full. By the 1950s, Venezuela's per capita income was higher than that of West Germany, meaning the people were fully enjoying prosperity. In 1958, a coup took place in the country. The king was removed, and a so-called democratic government was formed. Instead of one king making decisions, a few people now made them. But the timing wasn't right.
The Soviet Union had gained influence in South America, and the communists wouldn't leave Venezuela alone. That's why armed guerrilla groups began to form in various parts of the country.
The new Venezuelan government began fighting these groups with help from the United States, since they were acting against communism. The new government modernized Venezuela and pushed it forward. Good and modern schools and universities were established. Well-equipped hospitals were built. First-class roads were constructed, and the country's infrastructure was developed.
The OPEC is an organization formed by oil-producing countries. 5 major oil countries, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela, formed OPEC, and all 5 became members.
In the 1970s, after the Arab-Israeli War, the Arab OPEC countries embargoed oil sales to the West, which caused oil prices to rise again. But Venezuela and Iran did not take part in the embargo, and heavy pressure fell on the oil of these 2 countries. Because oil prices multiplied, they were able to sell their oil easily and earn enormous amounts of money.
In 1976, one of Venezuela's presidents, Carlos Perez, nationalized the oil industry. The American and European companies that owned the oil wells there were required to hand them over to the Venezuelan government.
In 1979, when the revolution happened in Iran and OPEC fell apart so that each country produced as much as it wanted, oil prices collapsed sharply, dropping to nearly $8 per barrel.
In this period, countries that were heavily dependent on oil, like Venezuela, and even more importantly, the Soviet Union, were crippled. It was likely part of a plan to paralyze the Soviet Union because it was exporting millions of barrels of oil and running its country comfortably. But after the 1980s, the Soviet economy collapsed sharply, and eventually the system fell apart.
But what happened to Venezuela? Venezuela, which was also heavily dependent on oil, took a massive hit. Its economy lost more than 85% of its income. After this collapse in revenues, various uprisings broke out, even armed ones, but they did not allow a full-scale civil war to form.
One of the armed groups that was fighting the government in the country was led by Hugo Chavez. Chavez's group was the only one that remained, and day by day, more people began to support him. But he thought rationally and came to the conclusion that instead of fighting, it was better to enter politics. He was a socialist and had very strong speaking skills. When he gave speeches, everyone listened, and it didn't take long before he became popular across the entire country.
At that time, Venezuela had a population of 18 million and had become almost socialist. Everyone in the country had a basic income, and by law, if oil prices rose, this income rose too. People became so dependent on this money that almost no one worked anymore. They just ate and slept. And whenever oil prices fell and people's income decreased, everyone would pour into the streets protesting, demanding more, saying the money was too little. In other words, it became a lazy economy, but with a large population.
Hugo Chavez rallied the people, saying that the government was eating their money and that their income should be much higher. That's why, in 1998, he was elected president with a high vote. Venezuela fell in 1999.
That is, just 1 year after Chavez became president.
If we want to define what Chavez did with Venezuela, we can use Cuba as an example. He implemented exactly the same socialist laws in Venezuela. Everything became state-controlled. But it seems Chavez had forgotten Venezuela's history. Just 20 years earlier, oil prices had fallen below $10 a barrel, and Venezuela's economy had been paralyzed. Chavez increased the country's dependence on oil even more, and very quickly, one of the most unstable economies in the world emerged in Venezuela.
This unstable economy caused all investors to leave the country because they didn't know what would happen tomorrow. When the investors left, Venezuela's oil industry also ground to a halt because the companies that kept it running were gone and their equipment stopped working.
Their relationship with Western countries also deteriorated. All the equipment for the oil industry was made in the US and Europe, and they stopped selling parts to Venezuela. They were sanctioned. As a result, oil production fell day by day, and the pockets of the Venezuelan people grew emptier.
Year by year, Venezuela became poorer, and its money lost value so drastically that even if someone wanted to work, there were no jobs. Inflation reached such a level that Venezuelan currency wasn't even worth burning. In 2013, Hugo Chavez died of cancer, and his successor, Nicolás Maduro, took over. He is still the president of Venezuela, and under his rule, the country's situation has continued to worsen. Stores are empty, hunger is rampant, and millions of people have fled the country. The biggest mistake of this nation was that when oil was discovered, they abandoned everything else. Agriculture was set aside, industry was neglected, and they said, "We'll just sell oil and live off it."
This mistake spread poverty and paved the way for socialism, a socialism that delivered the final blow.
In short, this country, with all its natural beauty and strategic location, could have prospered even without selling oil, by attracting tourists with its nature and culture. But the abundance of oil prevented them from thinking about anything else. It continued like this until late 2025, when the US and Venezuela became involved over drug-related issues. On January 3, 2026, U.S. Delta Force troops entered the Venezuelan capital, captured Maduro and his wife, and took them to New York. They are now in Metropolitan Prison in Brooklyn. Now, in Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, Maduro's vice president, has become the acting head of the country, and we have to wait and see what happens next.